Hello and welcome to episode 10 of NLDR, the Narrative Lectionary podcast for people on the go. My name is Dr. Amy Robertson, and I'm here each week with my friend and colleague, Dr. Robert Williamson, for a conversation about this week's biblical text. Today we dip a toe into the world of prophetic biblical poetry through the book of Hosea. We play with the multivalence of poetry, discover more than a few translational issues, and bring our own parenting joy and antics to our understanding of this poem where God steps into the ultimate parent role. Thanks for being with us. Hello, Bobby. It's good to see you.
Hey, Amy. It's good to see you, too.
We have moved out of the sort of narrative portion itself of the text for this week, and we're into some poetry. How do you feel about poetry?
I think it's harder to read and harder to make sense of sometimes. The narrative texts, they have their own kind of energy and their own kind of plot. And sometimes with the poetry, I find myself having to dig a little deeper in order to kind of understand what's happening. But at the same time, the language is really beautiful, and the use of metaphor and imagery, it's pretty profound, I think, sometimes.
Yes, beautiful and requiring of some significant investment, and all the more so when it's not written in our language.
Yes, that's
right?
for sure.
So
yeah.
we'll encounter some interesting translational questions today. But so our text this week is Hosea 11, verses 1 through 9. Hosea is the first of the minor prophets. Can you locate us a little bit in the world of prophecy?
In the Christian canon, we're moving this week from historical books to the prophetic books. In the Jewish canon, we've been in the former prophets, and now we're moving to the latter prophets. But really what the difference is we are now moving into the writing prophets. That is, prophets who write oracles rather than stories
Who wrote
about
their own
prophets.
material. Yeah.
Right. And we're kind of headed in that direction. So we're going to look at Hosea and then Isaiah, and then there's Jeremiah's coming up in a few weeks. And so we're sort of moving in that direction of prophecy for the rest of this calendar year, and then moving into the New Testament in the spring. Prophecy sometimes confuses people because we think of prophecy sort of like being like Nostradamus or something like that, like some mystical figure from the past predicting things that take place long after the prophet lived. But to me, the way to understand what prophets are doing is they are mostly writing in the political milieu of their own time. They are often calling the kings to accountability who are the king in their time, and saying to the cultural and political elites, we better shape up. We're doing things that are making God angry, and if we don't shape up, these are bad things that are going to happen to us.
Right.
And maybe there's hope, and maybe there's not.
And the prophets claim that this message is coming directly from God.
Right.
Right.
Yes.
They are simply relaying a message from God. They don't necessarily want this job, as we'll, encounter in some other prophets. They expressly don't want the job.
Right.
It's not a fun job. You're telling people stuff they don't want to hear, generally speaking, but they are tasked with relaying that message.
Actually, in this period, Hosea is writing in the 8th century in Israel during the time of the monarchy. The kings, as we talked about last time, the kings since Jeroboam I, now we're in the time of Jeroboam II, 200 years later, and the kings...
it has not gotten better.
It has not gotten better. They're still worshiping false gods, or worshiping the Baals and the Asherahs. There's still lots of economic oppression and exploitation. And so the prophets in this period are trying to call the kings, and secondarily the people, to accountability for restoring proper worship and restoring proper justice. But they're not very hopeful about how it's going to go. They think God is nearing the end of God's patience.
Often in these prophetic messages, there is sort of a sense of laying out of the sins that have been committed by Israel or some group within Israel, calls for repentance and change, and some hope for reconciliation. It's not a hopeless situation. Okay, so that's a little bit about prophecy in general, and then you just gave us really a little bit of historical context for what's going on, right? So we're addressing mostly the northern kingdom of Israel here that is split off from Judah. They've had many kings now who have not been following the ways of the Lord. And in fact, in the year 722, the northern kingdom falls to the kingdom of Assyria.
Right.
So they encounter what one could construe as divine punishment, or I mean, clearly that's how the biblical authors are seeing it, that it's divine punishment.
If we think geopolitically, if we read sources outside the Bible, we might come to
Sure.
different conclusions, right? But this is from inside the Israelite Hebrew Bible story. The destruction comes because Israel disobeyed. The timestamp for the book of Hosea in 1:1 is during the reigns of King Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah of Judah, and the king Jeroboam, the son of Joash of Israel. This is Jeroboam the second. Now, basically, that places us roughly between 750 and 722. And it may be that Hosea's career lasted that last couple of decades and ended with the destruction of Samaria in 722. So he's writing at the very end of this northern kingdom.
So let's read a little poetry, shall we?
Yeah.
And then we can sort of see where that takes us. Starting in chapter 11. I fell in love with Israel when he was still a child, and I have called him my son ever since Egypt. Thus were they called, but they went their own way. They sacrificed to Baalim and offered to carved images.
Like this little verse, the more I called them, or they were called, the more they went away from me. They kept sacrificing to the Baals and offering incense to idols. That is essentially a summary of, basically Numbers through 2 Kings, or certainly Joshua through 2 Kings. And so it's established in this quick order that Israel started having problems almost immediately in their loyalty to the Lord. And so I think when we read that little line, they kept sacrificing to the Baals and offering incense to idols, we could call to mind all of the things that we read in that history, and especially in 1st and 2nd Kings. And that's kind of assumed here.
Okay, picking up with verse 3. I have pampered Ephraim, taking them in my arms, but they have ignored my healing care. I drew them with human ties, with cords of love, but I seemed to them as one who imposed a yoke on their jaws, though I was offering them food. That parenting metaphor to me gets sort of even tighter here. Like, though what I'm giving you the tools you need and teaching you how to function in the world, I'm giving you what you need, but it feels like a burden to you.
The NRSV translation in verse 3 is, it was I who taught Ephraim to walk. I took them up in my arms, but they did not know that it was I who healed them. And I really like that image of God teaching Israel, like Israel's like just figuring out how to get their feet on the ground. And, they've been in Egypt all this time and they don't know how to be a people. And God's like holding their hands and like doing that thing you do, with your little kid as they're learning how to walk.
Yeah.
It's such a tender image to me of what God is like a mother or a father who is just like helping this tottery little baby figure out how to stand on their own. The line, I led them with cords of human kindness, with bands of love. I mean, I'm not entirely sure how to read that, but it seems like God is putting some kind of lovingly oriented restriction on the people to get them to move in the right directions, and the people are resenting it. Where our translations really diverged is yours translation, the NJPS. I seemed to them as one who imposed a yoke on their jaws, though I was offering them food. NRSV, I was to them like those who lift infants to their cheeks. I bent down and fed them.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, really, really different.
Those are really, really different.
Yeah. And in the NRSV's version of that is one of my favorite images of God in the entire Bible, and so you're
committed to it.
It disturbs me a little bit that
it's
the translation is unclear. Maybe in just a minute we can look and see.
Yeah.
But that image of like God was to them like those who lift infants to their cheeks. Along with that image we were just talking about of God teaching the infant how to walk, like this one where you just lift the baby and like put your face next to theirs, like to think of God as doing that with God's people, to me is just such a tender and beautiful image of what God is this tender mother, tender father who lifts the baby and just nuzzles. This is a nuzzling image.
And does sort of, when the rebellion sort of comes, sort of underscores the hurt.
Right.
The place of hurt that parent figure would come from. Okay, picking up at verse 5. No, they return to the land of Egypt, and Assyria is their king, because they refuse to repent. A sword shall descend upon their towns and consume their limbs, and devour them because of their designs. For my people persists in its defection from me. When it is summoned upward, it does not rise at all. One of my questions in reading that section was, it says, they return to the land of Egypt, and Assyria is their king.
Yeah.
Is that the people just choose to do that? Or is it because they have been disloyal to me, I will send them to be overtaken by Assyria? Like, is that intended as sort of a punishment from God, or just sort of tough love? Like, okay, if you're going to go to Assyria, and, natural consequences.
Yeah, I mean, I think the text probably could be read either way, but I tend in the second direction where you were headed, which is God isn't sending them back to Egypt. God isn't sending them back to Assyria, but they have lost their way and they're not taking direction. And so they are willingly giving themselves back to Egypt and Assyria. This, in the political context of the 8th century, like Assyria was becoming the big power on the block, and Egypt was also an international power, and Israel is caught right in between them. And so the text is suggesting, I think, that Israel is submitting itself to the political powers that dominate the region rather than to the loving bands of God. And so when they make those choices, that has implications for them. But it's not that God has said, fine then, here's Assyria to dominate you. But the people have put their trust in Assyria and have put their trust in Egypt, and that results in being dominated by the dominators. That's the way I read it. Is that where you got God in your reading?
Well, I like both of the suggestions you just made. You should write a translation of the Bible, Bobby. And I like both of them. I like they shall not return to Egypt, but Assyria is their king. I like that. And I like no as an exclamation, sort of like, holy cow, like, oh shoot, they're going back.
Yeah.
Like,
right.
What I had been reading it as before was sort of like, no, enough. Like, I'm done.
Yeah.
They're going to the land of Egypt, because it doesn't, again, the tense just tells us it's not past tense. So it could be they will return, or they return, or
yeah.
The tense doesn't give us a whole lot of information.
Yeah.
But I would read it as sort of like, enough. They're going back to the land of Israel, like, you're going to bed now.
And if you follow the NRSV's translation there at the end in verse 7, to the Most High they call, but he does not raise them up at all. That comes back to what you're saying a little bit, where that translation is, now the little kid is crying out, and God is the parent. God is just saying, I'm not helping you out of this one.
Right, you did it.
Yeah, so even if they did go,
books suggest you should do some of
right.
that.
Right.
This is like natural consequences. You want to wear shorts to school when it's 30 degrees out? Okay, but I'm not bringing you pants.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's what's happening here. And yeah, so they have made choices. They're going to have to live with their choices, and God hears the cries, and God is saying, I'm sorry, but this time I'm not picking you up. So maybe I didn't send you to Assyria. Maybe you chose to do that. But now that you're there and you realize it's bad for you, like, you're just gonna have to tough it out.
So verse 8, my translation has, how can I give you up, O Ephraim? How surrender you, O Israel? How can I make you like Admah, render you like Zeboim? I have had a change of heart. All my tenderness is stirred. I will not act on my wrath, will not turn to destroy Ephraim. For I am God, not man, the Holy One in your midst. I will not come in fury. Is that a similar message to your translation?
Yeah, there was nothing substantially different There were some translational choices, but the sense of it is the same.
The sense of it is the same.
View.
So I'll just put in a little note that Admah and Zeboim in here are cities that were destroyed.
I love this little passage here because God, in the previous little section, however you understand that section, God was thinking something like there've got to be consequences, whether I'm going to create those consequences or I'm just not going to solve
let
those
natural consequences take right.
Yeah. And then here God had a change of heart to say, like, but you're my kid, how can I just give you up? How can I hand you over? How can I destroy you?
I can't let this happen. I can't let you do this to yourself.
That in the NRSV, the end of verse 8, my heart recoils within me, my compassion grows warm and tender. There's like this thought of Israel being threatened, Israel being hurt by someone makes God like physically sick. Like the feelings come up inside and God says, oh my, I can't let that happen.
Fine, I'll bring you your pants.
Exactly. Yeah. So I just like this image of God as this mother or father, this parent who can't, as much as they might want to let consequences come, just can't do it, and finally has more compassion than anger.
Yeah, and I think this line for "I am God, not man" in verse 9 is very well. The whole verse is, "I will not act on my wrath, will not turn to destroy Ephraim, for I am God, not man."
Yeah,
and I think that's so interesting to think that like man does act on wrath more than God does.
Yeah.
It harkens back. There's something in Numbers where the Numbers 23, where it sort of conveys the idea that God is not human, and so God doesn't change God's mind.
Right.
Like
just right after God changed God's mind about destroying Israel.
Right. Right.
Yeah, no, that's right. And it's interesting that like human beings often express their anger at others, and they justify it by they appeal to God in order to carry out their anger against people that they feel justified to be angry against. Right. And here is God saying, like, I'm actually not like that. Right. Although in the Bible, God kind of is like that a lot. But
not in this poem.
Yeah, right here, God is saying, no, that's not me, that's you. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I don't know what to make out of this exactly, but the word that's used there in the NRSV, the translation is I am God and no mortal. But the Hebrew is actually ish, which is most often used for like a biological male, although it can be used to mean human, but normally you would use Adam there. And so one way, I mean, it's possible that you could think about, we were talking last time, or maybe it was 2 times ago now, they kind of run together, but about the loins and the masculine turn to anger and power. And so like if you read it that way, I am God and not a man, right? So this could be critique of male exercise of power, the performance of masculinity in certain kinds of violent ways that are kind of uniquely male, and God is saying not like that. In the middle of this poem where God is being portrayed as either as a mother or as a father whose performance of masculinity is
very different.
Is not your usual performance of masculinity.
Centered in compassion, Okay, so the narrative lectionary actually ends there. It takes us verses 1 through 9 in chapter 11, but there are just 2 more verses in chapter 11. There's some really nice imagery, so we thought we would like to include those as well. So starting with verse 10, the Lord will roar like a lion, and they shall march behind him. When he roars, his children shall come, fluttering out of the west. They shall flutter from Egypt like sparrows, and from the land of Assyria like doves, and I will settle them in their homes, declares the Lord.
I love that. And, normally when God roars, like this is not a good thing, right? Like you think of Amos chapter 1, the Lord roars from Zion, and then what happens right after that is everybody is in trouble. Here, I mean, the metaphor is mixed a little bit because God is some kind of a cat maybe, and Israel is some kind of a bird.
But birds, yeah.
So it's interesting that here God's roar is a call to
It's a
come
call,
home.
right? Call to come home, call to follow.
Yeah. And they come fluttering out. The NRSV is trembling. And so it's almost like God, the jungle cat, is saying like, I'm on your side, and so you can come out because nobody's going to mess with you as long as, my claws are bared. Yeah. And so this roar, which is so often threatening in the Bible, is that invitation to the little scared, bird children to come wobbling back home.
Yeah, I have this image in my head, certainly from some kind of cartoon, but where there's like this giant, benevolent, fierce lion, and the birds like ride on it, like all the little creatures like ride on its back. So you think it's so tough, but then it's also a nice protective presence.
Yeah.
For vulnerable creatures.
I feel like that should be from a Disney thing. Is that from a Disney thing?
I think it's got to be from a Disney.
Like maybe The Lion King or one of them lions, or The Jungle Book.
Yeah, one of those. It's either the lion or the jungle.
It's clear that we're Bible scholars and not Disney experts.
Yeah. But we've watched our share of cartoons. So I think we have covered a lot of ground today in this piece of poetry that we have been gifted. As you are out in the world with your family and your friends and your congregations, how does this text come into your mind and your heart?
This text to me, it's just so at Mercy Church where I spend a lot of my time. My congregation, I've mentioned before, a lot of them are homeless or have been homeless, and the theology that is often functional on the street is a pretty harsh theology, that God punishes you when you do things wrong, and if you suffer, you deserve it, and maybe God is going to hurt you in order to straighten you up. And that theology is very functional among the people who come to Mercy Church, and it works for them in some kind of ways. But I really love this image of God in Hosea chapter 11 as kind of an antidote to that image of God as being angry and wrathful. Because here God is explicitly saying, I can't bring myself to be angry with you because you're my kid. And I love you even though you drive me nuts, and even though you keep making decisions that are bad decisions. And this text doesn't shy away from the fact that there are bad decisions that bring hurt.
Oh, for sure not. Yeah.
But it's not God inflicting them. It's that people make choices, and those choices turn out badly. And maybe God doesn't want to help people out of those situations. But in the end, in this text, God does. And I think that's such an important image to lift up for my folks, but I think just for people in general, is this text envisions a God who is so compassionate and so loving and remembers the good days when we were learning how to walk, and when we used to nuzzle cheeks, that God's compassion just overwhelms God's anger. God might want to be angry, but God just can't do it. I think that's really beautiful. And when I read this text, even as a male who has a daughter, like I relate to the father figure in this text, or the parent figure. But when I read this text, this is a mother. This is a mothering image of God for me. And that line, I am God and not a man, to me that is saying there's value in lifting up the femininity of God in images that are thought of as classically feminine.
Right.
And that God has these too. So God is performing femininity or some kind of alternative masculinity here, and that is every bit as much who God is as the kind of angry, punishing God. And here that compassionate God kind of triumphs over the angry God. What do you see? Did I take all the things?
That. No.
What do you see when you...
I know it's interesting when I read texts that are poetry, I guess, that is presented in a metaphor that sort of uses like familial relationships. For whatever reason, I find that I put myself in the position of all the different members of the family, to the extent that I've been the member. I have been the child. I have been the parent, And I guess I have some empathy for all the characters, even though, Ephraim doesn't come off too well here. And so what I see is they had this sort of sweet time for the early years of their relationship. But I don't see it only as God was so wonderful and compassionate. I see it sort of as this is the way that the roles needed to be and should have been. Like what is the kid going to teach the parent to walk? Like this is the way, this was right and good that it should be this way. And that rebellion is extremely painful. I mean, it's painful as a parent. It's extremely painful to God. But I also think it's, at least in terms of parenting, it's part of the natural process. I think what I come back to at the end here is, God comes back to a place of compassion and says, I can't cut you off because you are my person, my people. And then in those last couple verses that we sort of added into the narrative lectionary, God roars and the people come back too.
Yeah.
Like the people also are not cutting it off. Like they go through this extremely hard point and then they come back together. And then we don't know what happens after that. I mean, it doesn't say once they happily ride on the lion's back through the Jungle Book movie.
Yeah.
We don't know what happens after that. But I don't know. I guess I take from this that there is meaning in the life cycle of relationships that can go through extremely painful times. And the fact that it is really painful doesn't necessarily mean it's over. And it doesn't necessarily mean it shouldn't have happened. Like it's just part of relationships.
I really like that a lot. That's beautiful.
I don't think that's what the biblical author was going for, though.
Well,
this is fine.
Yeah.
I'm sure you've seen that meme with the dog in a room where everything is on fire, and it says like, "This is fine."
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's clearly not fine in the eyes of Hosea. But thinking about it sort of through the metaphorical lens, that's where I kind of land.
Yeah, I like it.
Next up, Isaiah. Yeah.
Yeah, the Song of the Vineyard in Isaiah 5. And then we're going to get our first text that is, well, I guess it's our second technically, which is read in the Christian tradition as a prediction of Jesus in Isaiah chapter 11. So that is going to open up some new possibilities in our dialogue.
I look forward to that conversation, and I look forward to seeing you next week. And cheers. That's a wrap for another episode of NLDR, the Narrative Lectionary Podcast for people on the go. Join us again next week. We'll be looking together at the book of Isaiah. Until then, be well.